Now, with many issues rocking the political and economic boat in South Africa, businesses still need to focus on the bigger picture and keep moving. But just how are they supposed to actually do that? Bruce Berry, CEO of the Turnaround Management Association, says business needs to keep focused on long-term goals. He joins us now. It sounds easier said than done.
Absolutely.
Tell us how.
Well, that's the point. I think, business has to understand what is their rationale for being in business in the first place. And obviously, things change, the environments change, the economy changes, the political dynamics change. So the environment is constantly evolving. And I think that's what business needs to do now. And they need to be adept. They need to be on top of their game. Otherwise, they're not going to be able to meet those challenges, which means they then go into some kind of distress.
What about SMEs, small businesses that don't have the capital flow of larger businesses? How do they actually get through the current economic difficulties?
Well, that's the biggest problem. The environment in which SMEs operates is the most difficult and the most challenging. And it's a statistic that most SMEs fail within the first 3 years. So they've got to get over that hurdle. And I think that's the challenge that we face as a country in terms of what policy environment are we in, how conducive is it for the SMEs to operate in South Africa? Are we making it easier for them, or are the barriers to entry becoming more and more difficult? And I think that's the problem.
Yeah. So let's focus now on bigger companies then. Some of them still say that they're feeling the pinch. They're losing profits because of, high prices, including fuel in South Africa. They are being affected by all of this, and they feel that they can't operate on the same levels that they have been in the past couple of years. What's their recourse? What's their plans to actually make sure that they pull through?
Well, I think one of the things that businesses need to do is they need to constantly reevaluate in terms of where do they stand, what are they doing, what is their rationale for being in business in the first place, and how sustainable is it in the longer term. And I think, the minute there are signs that things are perhaps changing or that they're not where they were used to be or what they thought they were going to be, that's when they perhaps need to look at some kind of other alternative and get some kind of independent advice. And that's where this whole issue about a turnaround practitioner or perhaps a business rescue practitioner, if the business is that far in distress, comes into play. And that's the new environment in which we operate now in South Africa, where there is the opportunity. And we are saying you need to look at that sooner rather than later. Because the problem is, of course, we leave it too late, and then when it becomes too late, it becomes more and more difficult. And then to overcome those challenges, to overcome that distress, becomes then increasingly difficult, and then ultimately sometimes the business might not survive.
Yeah. So economic difficulties aside, how do businesses actually deal with political and policy uncertainty in South Africa?
Well, I think they need to, first of all, it's a minefield, because they're being hit with all sorts of things. Things are changing all the time. So they need to be on top of their game. And I think there needs to be some kind of clarity of purpose. And again, the problem for South Africa as a whole is the policy uncertainty. Where is the country going? Where is it that we want to be in the longer term, 5 years? And I know it's very difficult to make a longer-term prediction like that, but I think we need to have some kind of general direction, some kind of overall policy goal that we all subscribe to as the country. And then businesses within that, what is their particular niche and how are they going to support that?
Land reform is something that many businesses are very worried about. I mean, that of course would be a warranted concern for some. Others would argue not really because of the approach that government says it's going to take on it.
Well, I think that is the elephant in the room at the moment. How is that land reform going to play out? I think there is a realization and an understanding that we do need land reform. That's not in dispute. The question is, how are we going to implement it? And I think that's the challenge. And again, coming back to your earlier question in terms of the policy, what is that policy going to be? So how is the business supposed to respond? They will only be able to respond effectively when they know what the policy is and there is clarity around that policy.
So it needs to be done quite fast. The clarity needs to happen quite quickly. Now, given all of that we've spoken about, you still say that business owners should be cautiously optimistic. How is that possible with all those hurdles?
I think, again, the signals that are coming from government, the indications that we've been getting now from the ratings agencies too, is that, the ship is turning, but like all things, it's going to take time. It's going to take commitment. It's going to take a review of the policies. And I think we should all be focusing on that. And I think perhaps now is the time to focus more on the positives rather than the negatives, And yes, there are challenges. There's no disputing that. And no one said it's going to be easy. But I think rather let's be positive rather than negative.
All right. Thank you so much for your time and your insight. Appreciate it. That was Bruce Berry of the Turnaround Management Association.